So you're saying Jenkins is a demon? And
Jenkins is a demon. Well, he's sort of
a demon butler.
He's kind of a demon wrangler. He's actually he sort of summons demons on your behalf,
like a demon shepherd.
A demon shepherd, yeah.
It's like a pyramid scheme of just demon summoning.
It's just demons
with
all the way
Jenkins
down
at the top.
Yep.
Butterscotch Shenanigans.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 191 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam and I am yet again wondering if this episode number is prime.
I'm Sam and I was thinking this episode number is a palindrome.
It is a palindrome, that's true.
What is it, a primandrome?
Primandrome. This is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today is February 18, 2019. I did not have time to come up with a fancy date name because we're busy right now.
Yeah.
Before we get started, we have a warning. Anything can happen on this show. There's going to be profanity. So if you have some kind of, deal with that, then you can scoot.
Scoot
out.
Is anti-fanity a thing? I mean, if you can be...
This is a profanity show,
right.
Okay?
So
if you're anti-fanity,
you can just get out of here.
You're not a
Can you just have straight up fanity? Is this kind of like a whelmed situation?
Mm-hmm.
Vanity
is
just
fanity?
That's just
words?
a word. That's just
Vanity?
words.
No, but it has to be a bad word, right? If you can be pro the
No.
makes it.
If you're profanity, that just means you're cool with all the words.
Oh, I see. Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
maybe not though.
No,
maybe not.
It's not quite accurate.
No. Anyway,
A lot of them are still real bad.
we would. That's true. We're not into.
We're not into
into
kind of profanity in here.
Yeah, we're into wholesome profanity.
It's not so much wholesome as it is non-violent.
It's just fucking awesome.
Yeah.
It's just great. It's just
We're
great.
into fucking great profanity.
Yeah.
It's just the good kind. We'd also like to thank our recurring supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net, whose monthly pledges keep our pods casting. So thank you very much, you guys. Let's talk about elves.
Elves? So, I have a story.
Okay.
Saturday night, lay down in bed with my wife, and every time her head hits the pillow, she just has questions. Okay? It's like a...
When you say, so her head's hitting the pillow, like is she
Is this
really
during a
diving?
pillow
I
fight?
throw her so hard at the pillow, she's like, what? Every time.
And then she has a thought.
This seems like a fair question.
so we lay down and we start chatting a little bit. And then we were talking about something about, looking however old you are. And I made something. I was like, oh, well, you're basically ageless. You're like an elf. And her response is, elves aren't ageless. And I said, yes, they are.
They're immortal.
And of course, I'm
because
thinking,
they drink from the moon well.
Exactly. So I'm thinking all of the elves that I ever think of immortal. And I was like, what elf is old looking to you? And she's like, the Keebler elf. Well, I mean, you're not wrong.
She's
but
pretty up on the Keebler lore
You know,
of like the Keebler universe.
I never considered Keebler elves as part of the canon of elves generally,
Yeah.
But they are old.
They're wood elves. They're tree elves.
Are they old?
There's the one of them has white hair. It's true.
He might be an elf wizard, so he just has kind of Gandalf look.
The magic
It's
course.
also
Yeah.
possible that the Keeblers infuse the magic of their souls into the
cookies.
packaged cookies that they produce.
Yeah, that's probably it.
And so, of course, that's how they age. Normally,
They normally would not age.
I
Wouldn't,
see.
but they have to. They have to give
flavor
up.
these somehow.
So the reason the Keebler
You can't just simply make a cookie that's that good.
No,
right?
some of your soul has to go into it. Well, this is true just for people too. Like if you're baking some delicious baked
shit,
good,
I brought cookies in this morning.
yeah, the more soul you put in there, the more delicious it is.
But also,
That's
the faster you age.
The faster you age, but I think it's just we as mortal beings that don't have real magical properties are not really good at transferring our souls into things.
Right.
And so I think just the amount of soul transference that you can generate on kind of a per cookie basis is pretty low.
But you also just generate soul, kind of like in a mobile
Sort of
game,
passive.
like a day by day, a certain amount of
I
soul.
think when you take a nap or something like that, probably you get a little bit. But I do think
or
that
when you cuddle an animal.
Yeah.
that happens.
Yep.
I thought you said cut real quick. I was like, whoa.
when you cut,
When you sacrifice
when
an
you
animal to
sacrifice-
the demon god.
that's also true.
I think the downside of this though is that as humans, maybe elves can do this, I don't know, but as humans, we can't get the soul back out. Like the elves put it in there and we eat it and we're like, that's tasty, but then we don't get
But we can with human
we
souls,
actually
though.
age faster when we eat.
So maybe
those cookies.
maybe the human soul economy, like the reason that it works is because of the fact that we can consume the souls of our fellow humans. And so sure, when you put some of your soul into a cookie, right? That's fine. But then if you eat somebody else's cookie, then you're going to get a little bit of soul back.
Is this
right?
why mass manufactured products tend to taste less
They're
good?
just
Yeah.
soulless.
Yep.
That's
They have to be because they're being made by machines. There can't be any
Yeah.
soul put in there, right?
Right.
And they also don't replenish your own soul when you eat them.
Whoa.
You know, but like this is also why if you know, people running, like if you're a person running a bake shop, right? And like the more it grows and the more you have to start committing to it, the more of your soul you're losing, but you're not getting that much soul back.
right, because machines making cookies, they're not putting any soul in there.
No. But so if you're doing this all with human labor, putting just all this love and soul in there, then this is why running a business makes you die faster on average.
I feel that.
Because you put out more soul than you could possibly get back. You know?
Yeah.
Well, unless you stop doing that.
Yeah. Well, this is why we
Once
had
you
to
stop putting
install
soul into your business, that's when you get all the stock options and
Speaking
all
of
the other shit.
Activision,
Let's talk
Blizzard.
about let's talk about ActiBliz,
Segway.
which people are now calling Activision Blizzard, which is actually Activision Blizzard King in like a 3-part.
I love how everyone just
Everybody
leaves
just
off.
ignores that last
Like,
one.
don't act
yeah.
like the mobile opponent
People
exists.
don't necessarily feel comfortable about the fact that Call of Duty is coming from the same corporate entity that makes Candy Crush, but it's there. It's in there. Also, the corporate entity that makes Lucio O's, the Overwatch brand cereal
Yeah.
that you get free loot boxes when you.
And if you think we're joking, we are not joking.
That's a real thing.
100% exists. I saw it in the grocery store.
Yeah.
Brought a picture.
So last week, I think on Monday or Tuesday, after we did the podcast, Activision Blizzard came out with their earnings call, their quarterly earnings call, and they were like, "Great news, everybody! Record year. We have made the most money, the most profit, everything that has ever happened in the history of our 40 years of existence." And everybody's like, "Yay!" And then they were like, "Also, we're firing 8% of our workforce to celebrate." So, the optics are bad on this, and there's been a lot of conversation about what this means. And I think I'm on the fence about it because here's what happened. They, as a company, wanted to invest in esports and like all of these sort of like, you know, they were trying to ride the new trends of like what's happening with Twitch and all this other stuff. And you see companies like Riot throwing these huge 100,000 person tournaments and stuff like that with giant prize pools. And Activision Blizzard was trying to get on that, like trying to ride that hype train with their own games. But Overwatch is now a few years old, and that hype train is dying down.
Well, it really, I mean, it had its moment in the sun before like Fortnite and all that.
Yeah.
Kind of happens.
And
I mean, it's
so-
still got a big player base, but
Yeah. And so what ended up happening was, you know, when you're operating on their scale, where they have like 10,000 people, well, they did in their company. Now they got more like 9,000. Any kinds of initiatives like this, it's not just like, oh, let's just grab Susan and have her take care of esports. No, it's like you need a 1,000-person division to start up an initiative like that. And as well as you need a huge volume of customer support staff for your games and stuff. And so
And the better your games are doing, the more customer support staff you need. But that scales exactly linearly.
right. And then once the game goes past its peak, you don't need that customer support staff anymore because you don't have as many players. And so
The same thing is actually true for web infrastructure, right? It's just that, and it used to be the case that you would then have a whole bunch of like during peak times of usage of your stuff, then people couldn't connect anymore because like they didn't make enough hardware to support all that because the cost is really high and they knew it wouldn't get used forever.
yeah,
And then at some point it starts to decline and then they have all this spare hardware laying around that's not even being
it's
used.
the perennial problem.
And then this was the dawn of cloud computing where you could just basically rent space whenever the fuck you want.
Yeah,
But
it
you
turns
can't do
out
that with people.
there's no cloud people.
Nope,
And so
not yet.
Yeah, and so basically what happened
I guess
was
there is Uber. That's cloud people.
That's cloud people. So there's no cloud people in this scenario. There's just regular people who are not made of clouds. And so as sort of these games started declining and some of these other things stopped panning out, yes, like the company as a whole made a lot more money off of all the other stuff that they were doing, but those things that they had scaled up for didn't go.
individually probably work.
So
that might have been despite the losses they were taking on all these other dimensions.
right. And so this is a real optics problem in the sense that, like, yes, maybe they didn't need maybe they tried a bunch of stuff that didn't work out, like a lot of businesses do. And at a certain point, they have to be like, okay, we can't really sustain this, right?
It's just weird to time it with.
The timing is bad. The optics are not good. They probably could have paced it out spread it out somehow. And this happened, I think, back in like 2012 or 2013. I think shortly after WoW started declining a bit, then there was a big layoff in Blizzard as well. And these things happen with these giant AAA studios. So there's been a lot of outcry about how this was handled and just the kind of, there's that feeling of maybe betrayal from the people who were working at the company, see this earnings call. It's like, it's our best year ever.
Yeah.
And these people are thinking like, I was part of that. Like I helped to, I was working at this company during their best year ever. And then to be let go, it means there's no coming back. Yeah. Like if you get let go from a company that's having a hard time, then that's why you were let go. Right. And so, there's always that chance of like, if it's a company you loved working for, whatever, that if things start like picking up again, then maybe,
and it feels a little less personal, right? It doesn't feel like, but if they basically just said, yeah, we're doing great, but also we don't want you here.
Also, you need to leave.
Yeah.
It's got a very different vibe.
Yeah. So this kind of comes back to
this is all in the context too of like, they just brought in a new CFO who they gave like $15 million in
stock options,
some combination of stock and money. Yeah. And their CEO
just for accepting the job,
who gets paid also a lot. And so this is, of course, it's like 800 people versus these giant salaries that are being paid out to these C-suite level people. And the idea here, of course, is like, well, we have to save money because of how we think the future is going to look. So while we're on the one hand paying out $15 million to this guy, we need to fire 800 people who are in all likelihood, because they weren't developers, they were people doing customer support and that kind of stuff. These are probably actually some of the lower paid people in the company too.
Yeah, if they were more on like the support side of things,
less on the tech side,
they're not going to be paid like an engineer.
Yep.
So yeah, and at a 100,000 salary, you could pay 150 people with $15 million.
Yeah.
Instead, right? So like that's a pretty big disparity. So these are the kinds of things that get people talking about unions,
all sorts of stuff,
all that kind of stuff. So we'll kind of see what the fallout is from this whole thing, if any. It might just be another thing that happened, you know?
Yeah, but I think an important thing just to always remember when these things happen is that publicly traded companies are not and cannot be your friend.
Right.
No matter how much you love the stuff that they make.
Unless you're a shareholder. Then they're your
unless they're a shareholder. Yeah, right, exactly. but they're only your friend in that specific context. If you're also a user of the thing that they make, they're not your friend in that context. They're only the friend they're only your friend in one dimension, which is you as a shareholder.
Yeah, I think the best framing of it is that the purchasers of the product are not the customers. The customer is the shareholder.
Correct.
You know, because the goal, this solely stated goal of the publicly traded company is to maximize the wealth of its shareholders.
Yep.
And just by whatever means is available to that company.
Yeah.
And if you are Activision Blizzard, then your means is, well, we have expertise in game development. So that's what we're going to do to maximize shareholder wealth.
Yep.
But if that also means making cereal and doing esports and doing all kinds of other stuff,
loot boxes
and making basically online casinos, then we're going to do that too, because that makes money. And that's the point. So it's just the kind of thing that you would exactly expect to happen, given that that's how things work. So anyways, we'll kind of maybe track that, and we'll talk about it more next week if anything else comes down. We also have something else happened, which is
on Tuesday.
Mario Maker 2 just suddenly appeared.
And then we got a lot of questions from, I don't know, like 5 people from the podcast questions and a bunch of people in the chat being like,
Discord, Reddit, everywhere,
just being like,
so what are you guys
gonna, what does that mean?
So we're going to talk about that.
We'll say first that we thought we had until the end of the year before this would happen.
I feel like all of us kind of felt like it had to be coming soon because it just did too well on
It's
Wii
a great
U.
game.
Yeah. Like we believed it was coming to the Switch, definitely.
Yeah.
But we really thought it was going to be like
an August or December
release or something like that.
Yeah.
And we had no basis for this. It just seemed like that was what was going to happen.
Yeah. So we got a bunch of questions about that, so we can just kind of like hit those questions and we'll just talk about it. So
the first thing we should say is just what we're even talking about, which is that Mario Maker 2 is now coming to Switch, announced for June.
Yeah,
June.
And the reason that is interesting for us is because Level Head is essentially sort of a equivalent genre of game as Mario Maker. It's a maker game.
Yep.
And it is also, of course, we don't have the Mario IP And then on top of that, the community that we are hoping to leverage to launch Levelhead really effectively is the Mario Maker community, or was a Mario Maker community. And so there's a big question like, okay, what is shit? Because now these people who've been waiting for a long time, who we were going to fill the gap for, there's Super Mario Maker that's just going to fill the gap. So,
Yep.
What does this mean?
So,
Do the questions.
first, these questions come from podcast.bscotch.net. First question comes from Zooslap Wumpywippy, who says, hello, longtime listener, first time asker. With the announcement of Mario Maker 2, how does this impact Levelhead's development? Does it add more pressure, or do you think Levelhead is sufficiently independent enough to carve out its own niche? I'm really interested to know how devs react when a high-profile game in the same genre is announced. Love the podcast and all the lovely work you guys are doing. P.S. As a full-time dev, it is hilarious and amazing to hear you guys discover the magical world of DevOps. So for us, it was basically, we never hoped to compete with anybody, really. And we've always felt that if you're trying to directly compete with another popular game, it's a losing proposition. You're already losing, right? Because they have an entrenched, established user base and all that stuff.
You have to be there. You have to somehow blow that thing just absolutely away along every possible dimension to cause people to migrate from the game that they're already in into the one that you have put out.
And so there has to be the right combination of circumstances to do that. And look, we talked about last week something like Apex Legends, which is doing great against Fortnite. Although I think Fortnite still has
it's still doing fine.
Like 90% of its original player base, and there's no guarantee that those people won't just go right back to Fortnite in the longer run. So people tend to get entrenched into certain games as their hobby, and they're just in there now. And so part of our strategy was things like, well, we're not going to be on only the Wii U, for example, because Mario Maker is inherently attached to Nintendo hardware.
And they've been very firm about their stance of not bringing their full games literally anywhere else.
Yeah.
So it's not coming. It's not going to arrive on PC.
So one of the ways as a business that you can sort of get around this competitive problem is to just be where the other thing isn't.
Yep.
Right.
So we're still safe in that domain.
Yeah.
I'm not worried about that.
Yeah. And the plan with Levelhead was PC, Mac, iOS, Android, and Switch. Mm-hmm. So obviously this may put a kink into our Switch plans. Mm-hmm. But in all the other domains, we may be able to find an audience that otherwise wouldn't really have even considered getting involved in this kind of game.
Yeah, I mean, I guarantee you, like after seeing, Kerbal Space Program, Besieged, like all these games that are about building stuff and that exist on PC, there's got to be
there's a market
a Mario Maker-esque crowd who has never gotten to play that sort of game because they haven't owned the hardware, or even who does but wants something different. So Levelhead is, like we said, it's actually very different in feel from how Super Mario plays, for one, and then also just the sheer insanity of all of the stuff we put in it, because we're not bound to any IP, actually. As terrible as that is for launching a product, it's great for just making whatever you want. And so we've got all sorts of just zany stuff that does not appear in a platforming context, and there, as well as a lot more complex like Switch systems and some other interesting things like that. So the game differentiates enough along those dimensions that it's not like that I think there's definitely room for both to exist, essentially.
It's going to play differently. It's going to feel very different. It's going to look different, But yeah, I think that's not the real problem.
No.
The real problem is actually almost never the game itself. The problem is the circumstances surrounding the game and the attention economy surrounding the game. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing that we are sort of grappling with right now.
Yeah. So dev has shifted, I guess is the easiest way to put it, according to
the
question.
It has shifted.
Mm-hmm. In terms of how we responded, there was a lot of just kind of staring.
Did a lot of window staring.
A lot of window staring while we were all thinking about
all right.
So this meant, and then a lot of very long discussion.
So last week I told a space story about how we got about Space Brian, and how we got attacked by a larger fleet and were completely outgunned, and we had no ships left. And our only option was we had to collapse the wormhole. Right? We had to find a way to get around.
There was no way to win. It was a way.
There was no way to win by taking this head on, and so we had to find a back door. Yeah. Right. And so that's what we spent last week.
We were looking for the worm. We're looking for the way to roll the wormhole.
To roll the wormhole. Mm-hmm. Okay. So I think we're on track for this.
I think we figured it out.
And we have no official announcements. because we got to keep things under wraps. But
and the reason for that is just from a general PR standpoint. It tends to be a better idea to purposely launch your news as opposed to just
blurt it out
leaking it out all over the place.
randomly.
Dev has changed. We've been prioritizing different things. And really what it comes down to is we were hoping to just get the game into a point where, similar to Crashlands, where Crashlands was basically as good as we thought we could get it, period, before it actually came out. Something like this situation has sort of forced us to basically recalibrate all of the billion Trello cards we have and try to figure out, okay, how do we handle what's happening and somehow get this synced up in a way that we can get it into the hands of players.
And we were thinking that, based on what we had left to do, a launch of Levelhead sometime toward the end of the year, basically. That was the original thinking on all of it. Now, if we launch after Mario Maker, we may end up with some troubles.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to figure out what our strategy is going to be and how to get this game into people's hands much faster than we originally thought.
Yep. Which in the end is, it's a good for all the people who want to play Levelhead.
It'll be fun for us too. I'm tired of not having a new game out.
Yeah. We were all, for a while, we were all kind of just very concerned about what this meant. And then we started to move into the excitement territory. We're going to be working a lot. We already were, but we're going to be adding on to that.
Yep.
To try to get these puzzle pieces to land. Because things are, it used to be the case that we were just kind of sitting on our tail from Crashlands, just being like, we're fine. We can
sitting on our tail, meaning the financial tail,
yes.
Not some weird
we're just kind of, and we were still working. We've been working very hard. It's just that hasn't been in the context of also making sure that we kept the game super tightly scoped. The goal was not to get it out as fast as possible or anything like that, because we don't need to financially. But now we do need to financially.
Let's talk about why the timing matters so much.
Yeah.
So it's essentially the attention economy surrounding these kinds of games.
Yeah. So our plan was not to we weren't planning on releasing, for example, on Switch in June. There was not going to be a head-to-head situation there. And
if we were, we wouldn't be anymore.
Yeah. So the question there becomes okay, so why would this be a problem if this game is relegated to a different platform entirely, right? Because you're not actually competing head-to-head. So the answer is because we are competing when it comes to the attention of press outlets, when it comes to the attention of YouTubers, and when it comes to the attention of the community that already exists around the previous iterations.
Especially that group.
Who, again, in most of our strategy discussions up until this point, have been sort of the core thing because we know that they exist and that they're hungry for a new game. And so the whole thing was okay, cool. As long as
we will be that new game.
Yeah, we'll be that new game. And we've already talked to some YouTubers, which we mentioned before, who are very interested in it. And so it's okay, if Mario Maker 2 is out and we try to come out around the same time, or even maybe within 3 to 4 months, because it's still going to be fiery,
they're all going to be making videos on that.
No chance at hell that you're going to come out and be
they won't take a chance on something else because they've already got the thing.
And their existing user base is now already playing Mario Maker. They're already playing the new game.
Yeah. So it's an important thing to just bear in mind too, as other developers listening to this. It isn't actually, even if we truly thought that our game was better. Even if that was true, and even if everybody else thought so too, it still wouldn't matter because we're going up against an entrenched opponent on the platform that they own,
and it's freaking Mario,
and it's Mario, and all the attention has already moved towards that because people are no longer looking for something else, right? And
now they're waiting for Super Mario Maker 2.
Exactly.
So
that's the wrinkle.
So what we have basically is a timer where there's as far as we can tell, based on the strategy we've seen in the past, coming from Nintendo, is they're gonna just launch the thing. And there's not gonna be, so we basically have a lull. We have a quiet time where we still might be able to squeeze.
Yeah, because they don't tend to do early stuff with YouTubers and stuff like that.
Yeah, there's not a lot of early preview kinds of things.
But maybe they would, who knows? That's the thing. They've been taking better advantage of all these systems too, including continued dev. And so we're well, shit. The whole thing.
Yeah, a lot of our obvious advantages are just no longer as obvious as they were because Nintendo has stopped being that sort of monolithic entity that spits out a game after 3 years of development and then just changes nothing ever again, walks away. They still mostly do that, but not completely. And so we don't know. We don't know if they're going to do basically live ops on this game when it comes out. Because if they don't, then now we're back in our advantage in terms of content, because now we can actually adapt to whatever they do. But if they're adapting to what we're adapting to, then we're not going to. And realistically, they're not going to do anything related to what we're doing, right? And so it'd just be us like trying to make sure that we're covering the gaps that they leave open or whatever. But if they're not leaving them open, so I mean, ideally we don't compete with them. Yeah, that's the goal. Because we can't. And so that leaves us with a very limited set of options that we have to do very quickly.
Yep. So we'll talk about that some more next week.
Yeah. So all I can say is I packed a lunch and dinner today. I'm going to be working 8 to 9. Yep.
I told my wife, I was like, all right, we're back. We've had some nice calm times for the past year, basically. Yeah, those times are over. Just expect me to be.
We've got some catching up.
Generally working mostly.
Yeah. So again, nothing official to say about it other than that we are trying to move faster now with some changes in our trajectory. I'd also like to thank some other people who asked questions about this. Calmzippa Aydsand, Doopvoo Tapdanger.
That's a good one.
Wow. And Ittymumble Jotort, who all essentially asked this, what are you guys going to do about this kind of a thing? So, that's where
it's fun. I'm excited now. I mean, I think the first hour or so, I was just like, well, shit. And then, once we start talking about it, it's moved into just being excited. Because being the underdog in scenarios is always kind of fun anyways.
Oh, yeah.
And that's sort of where we've lived. I mean, I think our podcast listeners know that we haven't actually won an award, like a first place award ever. We've always gotten runner up or like third place.
Yes, we have our little area in the office where at the top of our bookshelf we've got just like all of our second place, and it's like the trophy case of second places.
Yeah. So I mean, we're used to it.
Yeah, but also we get to, even though Nintendo is not going to give a fuck about what we're doing, we get to feel like we're taking on Nintendo.
That's true. They probably don't even know that we.
Yeah. That's the best part about it. Yeah. They're like, who? It's like that Star-Lord, man.
Right.
Who? Anyway,
but we get to feel like it, which is just cool. So like,
we get to feel like we're playing in the big leagues.
But
this is like, it's like maybe we're just gonna we're just watching the game and we're just gonna maybe catch a foul ball in the stands, and that's kind of we're like, I'm part of it. Anyways, so we'll see where that goes. Now let's get on to questions. These questions come from our listeners over at podcast.bscotch.net. First question comes from AstroBeef.
I think that's good also.
AstroBeef. That would actually not be very good beef because
it's super dried out.
Well, actually, it's mostly because of the microgravity situation, So then it would probably be really
tender.
Oh, you're thinking the beef was originated in
if it's AstroBeef.
I'm thinking it's grown in a space lab.
Oh, okay, so
it's probably super tender.
I was just thinking about beef that was put in space.
You just put it in there.
You just put it in there, and then it gets all dried out.
Sort of like. Maybe there's some beef in that Tesla Roadster that's like out in space right now. So there's like some beef jerky.
Well, think about, without the pressure of gravity, your beef would be quite tender because the muscles would just never be flexed,
But they also wouldn't really have any muscles.
Yeah, because you don't need any muscles.
Well, no, it's grown in a lab. So
the lab one.
Yeah.
Okay. But if it was grown in a lab, you could also just be growing underwater. And underwater is basically in microgravity. So that comes out the same.
That's true. You'd grow it in a sous vide.
Yeah.
How can we call it microgravity even though there's no gravity?
I think it's because there's just enough that physicists were like, there's some fucking gravity there.
There's always gravity.
Please.
It's one of those like.
We had to just appease the physicists.
Yep.
It's microgravity. It's so small you literally can't perceive it.
It's irrelevant to your day-to-day life, but it's just always there.
Yeah. Well, and actually, there is gravity. It's just that you are inside of a thing that's traveling at 17,000 kilometers an hour. And because you're going the same speed as it, you just aren't experiencing the gravity. You're falling, but you're also flying around.
Actually, is microgravity just for the case where you're actually experiencing gravity and just cheating? Or is microgravity when you're just when you're outside of the range of a strong gravitational pull? I'm actually not sure.
I don't know.
If you're just floating in space, if you're like,
Yeah, because there is
the
gravity.
thing is, you're still falling.
There is gravity.
You just can't tell.
You're just not experiencing.
So maybe that's what it is. Maybe microgravity is when you're under the influence of gravity but can't tell that that's what's happening. Maybe that's what it is.
So it's like gumbo gravity. You're like, I don't know.
Yeah,
because they don't want to say that there's no gravity because there's always gravity.
Because there is gravity. Yeah. Okay.
Because you're always being pulled towards something.
I'm glad we cleared that up.
Yeah, that was a real problem. I think we addressed that.
It is funny when you look at these really low gravity things. So remember that when they put some little probe on a comet, I think maybe the Japanese did it or something, and that probe had a hopping thing that it would do, where it would just shoot out a little tiny jet that would make it. It would give it almost no thrust whatsoever, but that was sufficient. I hear what they said. It
goes like a mile up, and
it went like a whole mile
back
up
down.
and came back down because the amount of gravity involved was so low. But it was just enough that it was still attracted to it, right?
And it'd be careful not to do a very, very slightly stronger pulse.
Because then it's just gone now. But the slowness was hilarious. It was something like the speed it came up was like an inch per
So
second or something.
Slowly drifts up.
It just like
a mile.
slowly
and it takes
drifts
like
up a whole
2
mile.
days.
Yeah,
It just
it's weird.
yeah. Once you get it, I was actually thinking about this the other day because I was pouring myself a cup of coffee, and I was like, I wonder if you poured a cup of coffee on the moon, because it would just take longer, for the liquid to pour out, and you'd just be like,
Yeah, what does it look like?
you would just take a while, Like if you wanted to pour your cereal, like right now, the speed at which it falls out of the milk falls out of the thing,
Probably what you do is you
It
just
would come
have
out at like a quarter speed, basically.
and it would splash a lot more, right? Because
Yeah,
because the droplets
because gravity's
would
what
just
keeps
go
that from
flying.
happening.
Probably what you do is you get a wider mouth on the pitcher, right? So you pour a wider river into it, as opposed to because we have like the really skinny mouthed pitchers and
Yeah,
stuff.
because we're trying to slow stuff.
But you also have to
Slow it
move
down.
everything slower. So like, for example, if you're carrying a pitcher, the gravity is keeping the liquid in there. And if you like move it in a certain way, on Earth, you're accustomed to how the liquid moves, right? So it's not going to slosh and spill out. But if you're on the moon, which is like a quarter
I think it's like a quarter
or something, or a
Is it-
sixth. I think
It's
it's a sixth.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's very small.
Yeah. So that means like if you slosh just a little bit, then all of a sudden the liquid just like bloop, and it would just kind of like fly out in a big blob.
and then slowly,
And then slowly,
blobbly.
slowly just sploosh onto the floor,
Honestly, I think
It would be
the only
fucking
reason
annoying
the
being
only
on
reason
the
I'd
moon.
ever want to go to the moon or to Mars, sure as fuck not to live there.
Yeah.
But to go there on a trip, if that ever
Mhm.
becomes a feasible thing in the future, would be just so I could play with liquids.
Yep. Just splash
Just to
some
see
liquid
and like
around.
jump around. Like those two things, I think would be so interesting and fun.
But I would have loved it if like we sent people to the moon, right? And then they're on the shitty radio connection and stuff, and then NASA's like, ground control's like, tell us what's going on, what's it like? And they were all like, honestly, you guys, it's fucking annoying up here. Like
It's the gravity thing.
it is really annoying being here. Everything is slow. It's hard to pour my cereal. I think we should just call this whole thing off. Like, this is not worth it. Anyway, AstroBeef asks, as a novice game developer, I haven't fully figured out my design values, and I don't know when I'm doing something that is objectively bad, like using bright blue and red colors together, which I'm glad that you've got that one figured
It's
out.
very good, yeah.
How do you know when your design is bad and when your design is just different? Do you think that it's important to make a set of design values like moral values?
I know there are some studios that have, or for individual game, whatever else, to do design pillars is the idea, right? I mean, we've done this with Crashlands in the past when it was getting kind of unwieldy. We actually haven't done it with Levelhead. It's sort of just in there, probably.
Yeah.
But basically what you do is you define what the, with regard to the overall purpose of the game. So say you're making like a top-down hack and slash game or something like that. That's been made a billion times. And so the question is, what are the core sort of ideas that go into your version of it that make it an interesting mix of ideas? And so if you're say you have like 4 pillars, if all of them are basically the exact same ones you would see in every other top-down hack and slash, then you're not making a game that could really, well, frankly, do anything new or probably be of much interest. So usually,
Then you're just competing directly.
yeah,
with
you
what's
never
over
want to
there.
compete directly. And so, so in that case, it'd be, what was the game I saw? Book of Demons. I don't know if you guys have seen this, but it's a Diablo-esque game, but everything is like paper based. So, or like cardboard cutouts.
Yes.
And then you have a deck of cards, and you also, when you enter into the dungeon, you basically go along a track through the dungeon. So you don't actually fully explore it and stuff like that. You just kind of go through this almost like an amusement park sort of thing, and then you're reacting, playing these cards, and doing all stuff. So they took, again, an existing genre like the hack and slash thing, and then said, okay, what if we converted the fighting aspect into this card system to change that up, and then put this weird sort of aesthetic on it, which is this cardboard cutout thing. So when it comes to the overall designs, you can, like, the values you pick can become these sort of touchstones where if you have a question later on where you're like, oh, well, we want to do this new thing, you can sort of run it through basically this. Think about it like a heuristic. It's just a shortcut for making these design decisions a little bit better and keeping things consistent. Because if, for example, you're making a hack and slash and it's all about like, being super gory and serious and like medieval, which is what a lot of them are. Then if someone had an idea like, oh, what if we had like in the case of Diablo 3, what if we had a land that you could show up in that was like all cute with unicorns and ponies and gummy bears and all this other stuff? Depending on your approach, if you said, okay, this game is at least not self-serious enough to allow something like that for fun, knows it's a game, essentially,
yeah,
then that's the thing you could do. If you said, no, actually, this world is very tight. It's like more like Lord of the Rings style thing where it's, it exists in its own entity and sort of thing. So you can use these to make a shortcut decision on. I think the difference between something being bad and something being different is just if you watch someone play it and they're not having the desired good time.
Yeah, well, this is an ego problem.
Yeah,
which is that you need to be able to remove yourself from the game and ask the question: if somebody handed this thing to me that I have just made, if somebody handed me this game and asked me what I thought, how would I feel about it? Mm-hmm. If their main menu is Comic Sans, bright yellow on bright pink, and then like hot like maximum blue buttons with maximum red text on them. And you're looking at this and you're thinking, no professional game studio I have ever seen would ever consider not only like putting this out, but even putting these colors together. Right.
Yeah, not even in a prototype.
Not even in a prototype, because even the prototype has to be tolerable. Right. And so you need to be able to remove yourself from it and like disregard the fact that you made it. And try to ask that question of like, how would I feel if somebody showed this to me fresh?
Yeah, and I think it kind of reminds me of you'll see some people who just continuously draw bad, right? Where they have they're just drawing poorly, and they always hide behind this thing of like, oh, it's my style.
Yeah,
and it's like, well, your style is just sucks. I don't know how else to say it. And it's weird that you think
you just have refused to improve and learn.
Yes, and again the value is not in the difference. The value is in the quality. So like, if it's good, it will be good. And it'll be obviously good.
If everybody keeps saying like, this doesn't look good at all.
Yeah. Or when they're playing it, if they're like, I'm not really into it. I mean, think about the Obra Dinn game that just came out, the Lucas Pope one.
Okay.
It's about being an insurance collector who's going to check out this ghost ship basically that came back.
Oh, that one. Yeah.
Yeah. And you're sort of trying to piece together as like a detective how all these people died on the ship to be able to really, at the end of the day, I think it's about getting your insurance claims figured out for this boat. Right. Which is hilarious. And the whole mechanic is you get this death watch that you can use to like see how the last moment when someone died. That's like, so you just go around and you piece together this big logic puzzle. Now there's like a bunch of different ways to execute that. But the reality is that Lucas Pope in particular, like that's a very different game than anything I've ever seen, than anything I think has ever existed.
Yeah.
But it's really fucking good because at the end of the day, it uses all of the game foundational principles really effectively to drive the player engagement, right? So I think that's always a question. Like if you're hiding behind the fact that your game is just different, usually like
it's bad.
It's usually bad.
To me, it's like the word. I had a college professor who would immediately give you an F if you used the word interesting in any of your papers. He's like, interesting means nothing. You are hiding behind this word, which literally just means I thought about it. Right. It is of interest.
Right.
You haven't actually done any thought on saying like, is it good? Is it bad?
Yeah.
Does it mean anything bigger? Does it
make some judgments on it, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And so your game being interesting or having an interesting premise or being unique or being different, it might just be you hiding behind your insecurities,
right.
and not acknowledging that you might need to shore up some aspects.
I think honestly the best thing to do is just get people to play it. And if they play it and it doesn't work.
That's a completely fine thing to do for the thing that you're already making. But when it comes to how do I just become a better designer and how do I do a better job of thinking about this stuff? That requires a whole bunch of just study. Because the thing is, you have a gut intuition because you've been out in the world experiencing things about what is good or bad. But it is harder to tell that with the stuff that you're making because of all of the emotional baggage that goes along with making your own stuff, right? So I think you can do is go play people's jam games, which sort of have to be bad by definition because people didn't have the time and most of them don't have the skill, right, to like put together something amazing, right? And again, even if people do have the skill, you don't have the time. So there's only so much you can do in a jam game. And if you just play a bunch of jam games, and there are infinity of them on itch, and just study it, like actually treat it like a homework exercise where you just ask, like,
how is this working?
How is this working? Like, well, how does this make me feel and why? Like, what aspects of this are working, what aspects are not? Because it'll be a very rich vein of huge diversity of even within a single product of things that feel really good and things that feel really bad. You'll be able to learn a lot from that, and especially if we then go do the same exercise with published titles that people sort of universally love. Because we made a big deal about what's that game that doesn't look great at all?
Slay the Spire.
There's that one. And there's another one. There's a few of them that we've talked about.
RimWorld,
right?
Yeah.
That we talked about a fair bit, mostly because of this whole apparent contradiction between an aesthetic that isn't, and it's not bad exactly, but it's not stellar.
It's not polished.
Well,
I mean, honestly, though,
polished,
but
right?
if you look at RimWorld or Slay the Spire, they still have a sense of things like color palette.
It's coherent.
It's coherent
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
it's
coherent,
consistent.
Yeah.
And it conveys itself effectively and well. And they aren't violating any of the like fundamental rules of design in terms of like how you portray visually.
The art is just not doing work for them is basically the way.
The art is not selling the game.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's not.
But the game can then still do really well because it's also not hurting the game.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think, but that's sort of it's just interesting that when it comes down to this question of like your skill versus your awareness of what is good and all this kind of stuff, there are still ways around all of it where you don't have to be a stellar artist. You don't have to study art. That doesn't have to be the mechanism that you use to make better products, right? You can also just learn better designs that you better understand how to fit the kind of stuff that you can make into a coherent aesthetic that people will actually enjoy and accept.
Yes. So there's a great Ira Glass quote about having taste.
Yep.
You know this one?
Yeah.
I'd recommend looking this up. Where essentially he talks about this problem where when you first start creating things and you get into that because you believe that you have good taste, you know, maybe you think you know what goes into a good game and you've been playing games your whole life and you always have ideas about how they could have done things better or whatever. And so then you go start to make your own stuff and you have the taste, but you don't have the skill to execute on it. And there's this really uncomfortable long period at the beginning where
it is a long period.
A long time. It's like 5 years long, you know, where you're trying to get your ability to execute in line with your expectations about what's actually good. Right. And I think if you genuinely can't tell what's good, then that's a skill you need to work on because that's the first criteria. Right. So in that case, it amounts to like going and playing really successful games and doing a lot of study on them and figuring out like, why do people like this, you know, and learning about the principles of design and visual design and sound design and all that stuff. So that would be, if you're at that point, then that's where you would need to start.
And that's actually a fast phase. I think that's the important note is like, you can rapidly acquire taste, I think. You cannot rapidly acquire the skills, which is sort of that's the difference between like the reason why it's much easier to, for example, even fans of games to go on Twitter or even write a review that is actually extremely on point, right? Where they're able to like, this game doesn't work because these 7 reasons that I, as just a person who's been playing it, can see. Versus being able to actually go in and now take those reasons, convert them into like designer notes and use them effectively to propagate.
Right. Well, especially because any change is now happening in a context, and so it doesn't get to happen in isolation.
Exactly.
And the consequences of that change, I think, is even valid criticisms may become sort of invalidated by what would happen if you actually acted on it. Right.
Oh, yeah.
Where there are certain changes you can say, well, yes, we could make that, and yes, that would make this aspect of the thing better. But the consequences to some other part of the game is then actually a net negative, and that's why we chose not to do it.
And we've talked about it in the past, those slippery slopes of changes where every change exists in a context. You change one, you fix one problem, and that problem might have actually been making the game better in a whole bunch of other ways. And so people just had to kind of deal with it, and that's okay, actually, you know. So yeah, I mean there's a whole bunch of layers to it. So, but yeah, it's just all about doing that research and then doing the legwork and figuring out where your games stand relative to other stuff.
As with everything else, there are no shortcuts.
That's right.
Unfortunately.
You just got to do the work.
Yep. All right. Next question comes from OXDODECADO, who said, which I think is hex code for something. Hopefully
not something bad.
So,
Well,
if so,
what is it, like 4 letters?
How many characters was it?
I don't know.
after the 0x.
As a person, I can't perceive anything larger than 7. So it's larger than 7.
Okay, fair enough.
Who says, do you think Butterscotch Shenanigans will finally get a Wikipedia page after the release of Level Head? Probably not.
Probably not.
Yeah, we can't make one anyways against Wikipedia rules.
I don't know. I don't measure my worth by Wikipedia mentions.
Yeah, I'd say at this
Yeah.
point, when you factor in pirates and everything else, I think we've had something like 15 million people play our games.
Yeah, I'm fine.
And at that
Good.
point, if not a single one of them considered spinning up a Wikipedia page for us, I
Yeah.
think we're done. I think that's it.
But as we also learned, almost all Wikipedia pages are written by one dude.
That's true. We just got to
So,
call that guy.
Yeah, he just hasn't played our games yet, I think.
Mhm.
But I mean, it is a fair question. Though, just who actually
Who's doing
writes Wikipedia articles, right? Who is it that like sits down and they have an experience of some sort and they think, I wonder if this thing
That is a true question.
has a
I've-
Wikipedia page, and then they go look, and then if it doesn't, they make one. There's got to be some. It has to be like the tiniest sliver of the human
Well,
population.
it's that guy.
Well, there's a
Yeah.
lot of things that I'm into, but I have never ever contributed to a Wikipedia.
Me neither.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. You look at Wikipedia and you're like, oh, well, I guess that's what's there.
I actually think I might have submitted one edit when I was in grad school.
Ooh, bold.
I think so, because there was a thing that was about some topic I was studying, and I found a Wikipedia article while I was like looking into it, and I was like, oh, this is not right. And so, but I think that's the only thing I've ever done was that one line edit.
So maybe this could be, some kind of a grassroots thing that our podcast listeners can get started.
Yeah, it's actually funny too,
maybe just making the page. There doesn't have to be anything
But
in it.
it's a funny question to ask, right? Because this person could have, instead of asking the question, gone and just made
made
a
it.
Wikipedia page.
They're like, no, I'm not doing
It does
that.
take.
Yeah, do you think somebody else who is not me, obviously, is going to go
You're
in the
not
future
supposed to.
and make
You're not
his page?
supposed to make your own pages, right? Like that's against the rules somehow or another.
I don't want to make my own Wikipedia page.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that undercuts
It's
it
just
somehow. So maybe
Go do it.
Although honestly, I kind of hope it doesn't happen because it's like the wall of second places. It's like for me, it's just it's a hilarious point of pride. I don't know why. It's a funny thing.
Well, it's
Like
fun.
that you-
It's fun to constantly be pointing out all the ways in which no one gives a shit about what we're doing.
It keeps you humble.
It really
you know?
does because I mean, we've been working on Levelhead for a year, right? And like all of us think it's so fucking good, but no one else has seen it really.
Yeah.
And so, and then you put out a trailer, like our one that came out for Switch in September, and it got like 25,000 views, which is by far, in a way, way more than like Crashlands ever got when it was in a similar
Before
stage of
launch,
development.
Mm-hmm.
But there were also like 12 other trailers that came out that day, and one of them I think was like a Kirby game. Got like 300,000 views.
Yeah.
And so we're just like, well, okay.
Well, okay. fair point, Kirby.
Yeah.
Well played.
It's
That Kirby game did look pretty fun.
it does look really fun.
Of course, it's a Kirby game.
Yeah,
What are you
I love
gonna do?
But yeah, I think it's I don't know. It's fun. I don't know why people like being super into how good they are. Also, I mean,
I like
living in it.
constantly being reminded that nobody gives a shit. It's just
it's very good.
I shouldn't say nobody. Very few people.
Yeah.
Because the people who do care a lot,
Mhm.
and that also means a lot. But it's good to just be reminded of how small.
Yeah, we have our little pocket, and it's a very little pocket in terms of like
Tiny
scope
pocket.
of the World Wide Web and stuff.
Yeah. All right. Next question comes from nattysplines. If the money grabs all the money, would you consider becoming professional podcasters instead of game devs?
It'd be a lot easier, I'll tell you that.
It would. But also, I don't know what the fuck we would talk about.
Every day. I guess
Yeah.
we just stick on the 1 week schedule. What would we do
What
for
would
the other
you- what do
7
you
days
do?
of the week?
Yeah, I guess it depends on what that means.
There's
Does
nothing
it
we
mean we
could-
just have to spin up a whole bunch of new podcasts?
I guess
Is that-
we can answer a lot more questions, but
Yeah, but
You know.
we now have less of a right to answer them because we're not doing the work anymore.
that
it
never
would just-
stopped anybody before.
I guess not less of a right, less of a capability of answering them.
Yeah, I mean, how many like film critics do you know who are also directors? You know what I mean?
0.
Yeah.
Also, I don't know any of either of those
I don't know,
categories.
me
of people.
neither.
I think
That's
it
why
is
it's 0.
it is very cool if you can hit a point where you just get paid to be alive. Like you just get like that's essentially what that is to me, which is like you're a person, you do things, come talk about those things that you're doing.
I don't know. I mean, I think I enjoy doing the podcast because of the fact that we don't actually have to do that much work around the podcast.
That's true.
Right? Because like if we all of a sudden had to be going out there and marketing this, I don't know how the fuck you would do that.
I mean, clearly.
Yeah. I mean, we need to
we
go
launch
out.
games to market our podcast.
Yeah.
That's how we think about it.
Yeah, we think about the podcast as it's not a product. It's like a fan service thing
Mhm.
where people who are interested in what we're doing, it allows us to continually engage with our community. in a scheduled way that's very personal. But this isn't the point of it. Like the point of our studio isn't the podcast, it's the games. And the podcast is just a fun extra layer that we get to do. So, but yeah, that was kind of my reaction when I saw this question was I feel like if we stopped making games, then I wouldn't feel like I would have the right to do this.
Yep.
You know,
I just don't know what I'd talk about. I guess whatever else we're doing. Because it's like, it's not like I'm just going to be, it's not like we're just going to be laying around for the other.
I mean, I would, but
Maybe, yeah. Maybe
if I wasn't making games, I don't know what the fuck I would do. What would I do?
I guess you'd be podcasting.
I guess I'd be podcasting.
Yeah.
About maybe I'd start up a Space Adventures podcast.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe that's it.
Your Adventures with Space Brian.
Me and Space Brian would start up our own podcast. All right, next question comes from Bam182. You've been talking about your DevOps pipeline for a few weeks. Can you go into more specifics? Are you using GitLab, Jenkins, GitLab runners? What kind of stuff have you automated aside from deploying new game builds?
What's GitLab and Jenkins?
You know, Jenkins, that's the guy who you pay to come in and do your DevOps for you.
Yeah, he's just a British butler.
Mm-hmm.
He just comes in, he pushes a bunch of buttons.
DevOps butler.
butler.
Do you know what these things are, Adam?
I do, but we're not going to go.
We don't need to go into
We're
that.
not going to go into details. What
So
I will
just
say,
more high level. What other things have we done?
High level. So for the web stuff, I've got a full like auto deployment thing, but it's all being done through Amazon and Amazon AWS, Amazon Web Services has some really nifty little services, including a thing called Code Build, which is a lot like a Jenkins-like thing.
What does that even mean? What is that?
It basically means like it's just a machine that you basically give it a list of instructions, and you say, when you receive this information, do these steps, do these tests to make sure that the steps completed successfully, and then when you're done, put the product over here, and over here just happens to be on the internet where now.
So you're saying Jenkins is a demon? And
Jenkins is a demon. Well, he's sort of
a demon.
He's kind of a demon wrangler. He's actually. He sort of summons demons on your behalf.
Like a demon shepherd.
A demon shepherd, yeah.
It's like a pyramid scheme of just demon summoning.
It's just demons
with
all the way
Jenkins
down.
at the top.
Yep. Yeah. Right. But yeah, we're not doing anything that's sort of that typical, I guess. But it's in the end not very different from what other people are doing. It's just like the details.
Well, there's also the philosophy of DevOps about like making the work visible. You know, so you can see all the pieces that are going in and make better decisions about them. So we're also doing some work with things like telemetry and analytics.
Which has been really exciting. So we got that because one of the big things is we wanted to. I think when we watched it was the Overwatch 1 year anniversary
documentary
video
thing.
Yeah, they showed this war room they had for the day one launch,
like monitors and laptops up everywhere.
Yeah, they had this world map. And then as soon as they hit the launch buttons, that the game is available now, you could see the whole thing just like people logging in from all over the place into the game. And it's been a dream of ours since Levelhead does have that online stuff going on to be able to actually somehow see
people logging
in, like how like just kind of one from the interest part, but then two from the actual dev side, just being able to see, did something bad just happen or something taking too long to do?
Yeah, we want to see things like, you know, a world map that shows little pings where every time somebody publishes a level, you know, we see a little flash popping up on the world map.
So we got that. We got the basics of that hooked up.
So last week I put together an elk stack, which stands for. So everything in web tech is just some fucking stack or another because.
So a stack is just a collection of technology.
It's a pile of different services.
And the idea is like things kind of go through it in a particular direction, you know. So they call it a stack because like things kind of move up it,
should be
down
a pipe,
or whatever.
But okay.
Yeah, I think a pipe would probably be better.
Elk pipe.
But so when you're doing, and it's because like web dev is this very weird fragmented thing where any kind of particular kind of problem that you want to solve is typically solved by some big open source project that's completely different from the other problems and other solutions that you have. And so in order to basically make a full website, you need a full stack of different technologies, right? Where one technology is serving up your web pages, another technology is managing your API, and another technology is handling telemetry and whatever. And there's one for your database and so on. And it's basically because there's not just one sort of software product that just does all the things that you need.
This is why if you meet someone who does web dev, your first question should always be, what kind?
Yeah, web dev doesn't really mean anything.
They might just be like, Well, I mean, I used Wix once.
Right.
The Wix stack. It's a very small stack.
Wix stack.
It's
Actually,
a stack
that's true.
of
There are,
paper.
yeah, that's true. There are some stacks, I guess, like Wix or
Squarespace.
or WordPress or Squarespace, that kind of are all in one in terms of you as a developer experience it. The reality there actually is that they themselves
have a
have a
stack.
stack,
Abstracted all, yeah.
but you get to kind of abstract it away and ignore it.
You just get to look at the top of the stack,
Yeah.
which is Wix.
Right. So Elk is Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana.
Logstash?
Logstash.
It's like
Well, I mean, where are you going to put your logs?
Yeah, you can put them in a
I
stack.
was thinking about a mustache
Yeah.
situation.
Made of logs.
I think their logo might be mustache related.
It
I'm
better
100%
be.
sure.
log stack.
But this is really cool tech. Mostly, so that last piece, the Kibana piece, is basically just a front end for making charts, which sounds boring when you say it that way, but
It's hard and shit to do on the web.
It's in any context. It's very, very hard to easily make charts that are displaying useful information, and especially ones that are really dynamic. So you can basically say like, okay, I want to see the same chart, but I want to filter it by removing these terms or adding these terms or whatever. Or what do you want to say like, I want to see this over the last 15 minutes, or I want this to be updated every minute, or I want to see this in a 1 year stretch. So I can watch trends and whatever. So this technology stack makes that super, super easy. And so we've had this problem that we have to deal with, which is we can't see what's happening in our games. We can't see like, are there crashes happening? We have no idea what the usage is on our web infrastructure. We just like know it's being used.
We
or
did
hope
rip
it
out all
is.
the Google Analytics and everything around the time
Yeah.
that GDPR hit, because we were like, we don't know what the fuck they're doing with people's data.
Yeah.
And we don't want to be the one who hands it off to
Yep.
Google, you know.
And of course, what they're providing is super limited anyway, because something like Google Analytics is only showing you basically what's happening on your web page hits, right?
Right.
And they can add some stuff like they can kind of track users across. They can say like, well, this user landed here, and then they clicked on this, and whatever. If you want to do that level of sort of privacy invasion, right? Then you can get down to that level. But at the end, that doesn't really inform you about things like, is my website up right now, right?
Right.
And how much resource usage is like this aspect of my site
Right. So
taking.
this is much more the dev back end of
Yeah,
statistics.
so you want to get like really in there, you know, and just figure out what's going on. So I just basically watched.
So this is not for us to sort of like spy on people.
Right, it's to
This
understand
is-
what's happening to the surface. Right?
Yeah. And so then it allows us to do things like if we wanted to put some kind of telemetry into, say, like the level head campaign and try to identify areas where we need to tweak something about a level because people are getting stuck on it when it's supposed to be an easy one,
Right.
or it's supposed to be a hard one and people are just blowing through it, you know. So we'll be able to sort of capture all of that information.
Yeah. So it's gonna be really cool. I got it all set up last week just for the Rumpus stuff, so I can see like what the backend is doing, and already spotted some things where I was like, oh, that looks a little wonky, and then I got to just like immediately drill into the data because it makes it very easy to do that. So that thing is very cool. We're gonna be leaning on that
pretty hard.
very hard. But to finish the answer to this question, which is about what are we using for DevOps, the final piece for this is making the actual game builds.
Yeah.
And for that, we are hugely limited by game makers' lack of any tooling whatsoever for automated builds. So I won't go into any details here either because it's just details. And but between me and Shure and some open source projects that some people have worked on, we have constructed what we call the game pipe, which is a fairly hacked together, but not like in a terrible way. But it's a fairly hacked together thing because it has to be. Of this sort of there's just weird tooling that talks to Rumpus, but that otherwise lives on local machines inside of our office because we can't build stuff in the cloud with GameMaker. There's not a mechanism for that, and it has to be on Windows. But then we have to be able to build to Mac devices because you can't build for Mac on Windows, right? And so we have these kinds of weird conditions around us
We need several local machines all tethered together in various ways.
Yeah, and I will say we could be using something because something like Jenkins or Puppet or Chef, which is just a bunch of versions of the same idea.
Bunch of demon names.
A bunch of demons, right?
These demons.
Yeah, these sorts of things we could be absolutely using to help us basically manage those instructions for how things are supposed to work. The problem with any of those sorts of pieces of tech, of course, is that you have to learn that piece of tech before you can use it. And I've used a few of them a long time ago and found them super fucking confusing because at the time I was doing it, I didn't have enough of a grasp of like how to even think about the problems. And then by the time now when I've needed those things again, there was actually always something that was just more accessible. and not a generic tooling necessarily, but so like in the case of the game pipe, we could have come up with some sort of a Jenkins based approach probably, but I have no concept in my brain whatsoever for what that would look like because I don't use Jenkins ever, and I knew like all I could know is that I could probably use it, right? But that's not a problem solving technique. But what I do know is Node, and I do know how to make things talk to the internet. And I already have a website that can store and manage information. And so we didn't need to do that. Right? We can build our own tooling, and then our tooling can work exactly the way that we want it to. Yeah. And I think I don't know. I think it's kind of an interesting problem where if people who are doing DevOps, they're almost always using some sort of a build server that is Jenkins or whatever. And they get to know these tools really well. And there's of course enormous value in that. But you just don't need that stuff.
Yeah, sometimes it's too heavy-handed, you know.
You just need elbow grease.
You just need something.
And 6 machines all in your office,
right?
Tied together with duct tape and cables.
Yep. Yeah, that's all you need. Something is better than nothing, you know. Yep. And I think if we had a lot more different kinds of software going and a lot more different web projects and other kinds of stuff, then that would be the time when we would start to like maybe look into these other kinds of technologies. But for the most part, like for our web stuff, I've already developed my own system for being able to deploy any new web project into this same auto building pipeline without having to use any of these other pieces of tech. So I don't know. I think it's all doable without it, but there's a lot to it. There's a lot of DevOps people who know the shit out of like all these kinds of
demons.
Yeah, all the demons. And
Demon
I kind of wish I knew those things, but then I also don't need to, so it's fine.
You will when
we
you
all
need
wish
to.
we knew everything. But,
Yeah.
you know. All right, we got time for one last quick one from Sean. Sean says, when you come across a problem that is difficult to solve, how does it affect your motivation? Does it do anything to your confidence level? This can refer to a recent or a more dated experience. I feel this can contribute quickly to burnout. What's your strategy to persevere through a difficult problem without letting it hinder your quality and efficiency of work?
So I'll talk about this in the context of drawing faces, because that's one of the most obvious ones where if you do it wrong, it's just very hideous.
People are like,
ooh. When I start working on something like that, where I know I'm coming into something that is essentially hard or difficult in some way, if I take the approach where I just try to bang it out and then don't have a structure in place to sort of try to graduate my skills along or my effort along, then I do genuinely have a bad time. Within like 2 or 3 of these hideous faces that I'm rendering that do not look like the face I'm trying to draw, of course, like it's very dispiriting, whatever. But if you step back and you say, okay, maybe instead of trying to draw the whole face at once, let's just see if we can like nail the head shape. Just try the head shape of these things a few times. See if we can get the proportions right, And so you basically take what is the huge hard problem and break it down a bunch into the actual smaller sub problems, because usually it's the case that there's a progression of these sub problems that you can kind of layer up as you solve in a way that makes this much easier to actually accomplish the whole thing. And that helps you keep the momentum, I think, in place. Otherwise, yeah, it's just too fucking hard because you're trying to do too much simultaneously. And usually that means you're stretching your skills in many directions also simultaneously.
right.
Which is not good.
Well, and you often, especially if you're tackling a hard problem, the hard aspects of it often exist in lots of dimensions at once.
Yes.
And so if you just go after the whole problem in one go, then you're now struggling to do a whole bunch of things that you don't understand or know what you're doing. And so right now I'm rebuilding the feedback system for our games and for Rumpus. And so I'm running into this similar thing where it's just like, okay, I need a feedback system. That's the problem, right?
But that's like 90 problems.
But that's a lot of problems. And one of the ones that came up very clearly was that we need a way to allow people to upload content, files or images or whatever. And of course, that comes with a huge set of interesting and difficult problems that I've not had to solve yet. And then there's like comments are another thing, right? We want people to be able to comment on feedback, and that creates another set of problems. And so historically what I would have done for this is just kind of like spent probably a whole day, like just writing by hand, just like drawing out some maps of like what this thing could look like and what the tech would need to be, writing out sort of here's what I think the problems are, and just doing a lot of just thinking and trying to create the whole solution that I would then just go sit down and start just tackling. And with that, I would always find both on the design side and on the implementation side, a lot of just initial listlessness, where I would sit down to do it and I would just kind of find my thoughts drifting,
Yeah, I think because what you're trying to do
is
too
much.
big, not actually a task.
Yeah.
You're trying to do a project.
Yeah, you're trying to do a project in one go.
Yeah.
And so I've been trying to do a better job. And it's a hard switch to make, but it's also a hard thing to do.
Well, I think it's a skill in and of itself.
It's to
step
break
back and
down a problem.
Yeah.
And so I was practicing that with this feedback system where I just asked, what is this whole focus from DevOps on your minimum deliverable thing that does something, right? It's not necessarily getting the whole job done, and actually probably not getting even most of the job done, but getting something done, because now you have something that you can iterate on, and iterating on for design and for development
so much
is
easier.
way easier than coming out from scratch with from nothing.
And what you'll find is your initial design was simultaneously too big in the wrong areas, and you missed a bunch of stuff in a lot of other areas.
Yep.
So
and especially at least I find this for web tech, I'm so paranoid about performance and security that those two aspects of any sort of new feature that we want to add become like just baked into every sort of problem that I'm trying to solve with it. That adds a huge layers of complication. But both of these are actually, too early of optimization issues, right?
Yeah,
Because
you need to get it working before performance becomes a problem.
Yeah, and before
it's
security
not going to
becomes a
perform
problem.
at all
Yeah.
if it doesn't exist.
Right, because we have issues like with how are we going to moderate this content and whatever. It's like, well, if not a lot of people are using it, we don't even need to moderate it because we can do it by hand, right? So I don't necessarily need a moderation system right out of the get-go, right? And same deal with uploads. Like, well, if we have uploads, we have to be able to moderate images now. But we don't necessarily need that right out of the gate.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's some stuff where you have to try to figure out like what can I deliver that gets the job done, and then I can figure out how to solve. It's still important to be aware of those other problems. I just have an ever-growing list of all the things I'm like, these will have to get solved, definitely. Yeah. And so that way when I'm doing the work now, I can still use those pieces as I'm thinking about how I'm going to solve it, so I don't make my future life harder. But I otherwise don't use them. I don't actually bake those into my design.
We want to talk about this in the context of level design too, because this idea of these just working in layers essentially.
Yeah.
So my system now for making the levels for
and you've made how many levels now for Levelhead?
65 for the campaign. There's even more coming, and then a bunch of other ones. Yeah. And so
you also made like 2 other campaigns.
I
prior.
did. That's true. So probably like 100-ish.
At least 100.
But what's become very clear is that you can't do the whole level, quote unquote, as it will be experienced sort of in its final form in one go. Like you can't simultaneously be doing all of those things. So usually what I do is first I just lay in essentially what the player's movement is going to be through the level along with the basic hazards. Mm-hmm. And then depending on the idea or the story behind the level, then I'll throw in whatever the enemies and the sort of moving stuff, the switches, like all that more complicated stuff. And then actually after that, I basically do a beautification pass where I just go through and kind of like make things
sculpt it a little bit,
and then put little backdrop tiles in places to make things pop and that sort of thing. And then I go put coins in, and then I go put secrets
once
in.
you know like the path that the player will take, you can use the coins to guide them.
And the whole time,
you can't design all that at once.
Yeah, you can't do all of it at once. And I think it becomes very clear in certain contexts that that's just true about life and about how humans operate. But I think in other ways, it's really easy to lose sight of that fact, where it's like you just need to be working in these layers. So figure out what the layers are, and then start at the very bottom one and start working your way up. Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
It's actually one of those things about working with a technology stack also. Because for the web tech, I can build an API backend, and I need to build a front end UI for people to use it to talk to it. But those are actually separate things. And so when I'm doing layers, there's sort of a natural layer barrier there where I can be like, okay, cool. I'm going to like solve the API part first, and then
move on.
And then once that's done, it is tested and it all works, then I can move on to making a UI for it. And then once that's done, I can worry about now, how is the user going to get to this and experience it? And then I can deal with, okay, now what kind of security vulnerabilities does it create now that this exists the way that it is and that the front end exists this way and whatever. So some things have a more natural way of breaking them down, but even still, like I think your gut way of wanting to solve it is to do it all at once.
I think it's because you experience things all at once.
Yeah.
But you build things layer by layer.
Tiny pieces.
You build things one step at a time.
Yeah. And so I think it's that difference between those. And this might also relate to that game design question from earlier about like, your first couple of games, knowing if they're good or bad. Like it might be also the case that you run into that issue where you're experiencing the whole thing, at once when you're getting these finished products from other people, which are always spectacular. And then you go build your own, and it's just like it's currently in a state of just being kind of fucked up because that's the layer you're on right now.
Yeah.
It's like
because every game is just built out of thousands and thousands of small decisions.
Yeah, but that also
On a
gives you
day-to-day
opportunity then
basis.
to, when you're doing your design work, is if you're focusing on one particular layer, you can still have components of the other layers in there, especially if they're required. But where you didn't take a lot of time to make those things perfect and super good,
Yes.
it's just you have enough there that it's all coherent. So that's the whole idea of gray boxing art assets
And even prototyping. So
and prototyping. Yeah, because if you're as you're making your game, if you're trying to solve all the programming problems and all the art problems and all the music problems, just all the problems all at the same time, and level design problems, right? Then you're basically going to just have a shitty thing for a really long time because you can't solve them all at once, and so you're just solving them all slowly, right?
Yeah. And that's the conversation we had in the office where it's like, for the longest time, Levelhead has been in that spot where everything is like 80% done.
Yeah.
Like every part
It's
of the
good.
game.
The whole thing is good.
The whole thing is good.
Yeah.
And there's still every single piece of the game has this extra chunk of polish and debugging and security features and like all these things that it needs. And we can play it internally. And if we all sat down, like right after we recorded the podcast, we could all spend the entire week playing Levelhead. That's just how much the game offers. Right. But that doesn't mean we could hand it to somebody else because of the implications of all that stuff. Right. So it's internally fine, but externally it needs some work. So try not to get overwhelmed, tackle things one little piece at a time, focus on what you are doing and not on the final end outcome. You'll get there. All right, that's all the time we have for this week. We'd like to thank our producer, Fat Bard, for making us sound good. Thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, you can go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have merch, links to the community Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the podcast archives. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Goodbye.
Bye.